Imagine waking up in a country where your paycheck loses value before you even have a chance to spend it. You receive a salary on Friday, but by Monday, groceries already cost more. Saving money feels pointless. Businesses struggle to set prices, and every economic crisis feels like a repeat of the last one. For millions of Argentinians, this isn't a nightmare. It's everyday life. Argentina is one of the greatest economic mysteries in the modern world. It has vast, fertile farmland, enormous reserves of oil and natural gas, rich mineral deposits, a highly educated population, and enough natural resources to become one of the wealthiest nations on Earth. Yet instead of prosperity, Argentina has become known for endless cycles of inflation, debt, recession, and financial collapse. So how did one of the richest countries in the world end up trapped in a cycle of repeated economic disasters? And why does Argentina keep collapsing while other countries manage to recover? To understand the answer, we have to go back more than a century. At the beginning of the 20th century, Argentina was a global success story. Massive exports of beef, wheat, corn, and other agricultural products fueled extraordinary economic growth. European immigrants poured into the country, attracted by opportunities that rivaled those in the United States and Western Europe. Around 1913, Argentina ranked among the richest nations on the planet by income per person. Buenos Aires was often called the Paris of South America. Elegant architecture, modern infrastructure, thriving businesses, and a booming economy gave many people confidence that Argentina's future would only get brighter. But prosperity built on exports can be fragile. When the global economy slowed and international markets became unstable, Argentina's dependence on agricultural exports turned into a weakness. The Great Depression of the 1930s sharply reduced global demand, causing export revenues to collapse. Suddenly, the country's economic engine began to stall. Instead of adapting through economic reforms and greater competitiveness, governments increasingly turned to protectionism. High tariffs, import restrictions, and heavy government intervention became common. The goal was to protect domestic industries, but over time, these policies reduced competition and made many businesses less efficient. Then came one of the most influential figures in Argentine history, Juan Perón. Perón believed the government should play a central role in the economy. During his presidency in the 1940s and 1950s, workers received higher wages, stronger labor protections, and expanded social programs. Many Argentinians experienced a significant improvement in their quality of life. But these generous policies came with enormous costs. Government spending increased rapidly. To finance these programs, the state relied heavily on tax revenue, borrowing, and eventually printing more money. As spending continued to rise faster than economic growth, inflation became a growing problem. Inflation is often described as rising prices, but the real danger lies deeper. When people lose confidence in the value of their currency, they rush to spend or convert their money into something more stable. Businesses raise prices to protect themselves from future inflation. Workers demand higher wages, which increase production costs. Companies then raise prices again. This creates a vicious cycle that becomes increasingly difficult to stop. Argentina would become one of the world's most famous examples of this destructive inflation spiral. Political instability only made things worse. Over the following decades,
Argentina experienced repeated military coups, changing governments, shifting economic strategies, and constant uncertainty.
Every new administration promised to fix the economy, yet many reversed the policies of their predecessors before long-term reforms could take effect. Investors dislike uncertainty. Businesses delay investments. Foreign companies hesitate to expand. Economic growth slows even further. During the 1970s and 1980s, inflation reached astonishing levels. Prices rose so quickly that many stores changed them several times a day. Families spent their salaries immediately because waiting even a few days meant their money would buy much less. Then came hyperinflation. By 1989, annual inflation exceeded 3,000%. Imagine paying $1 for a loaf of bread today and $30 for the same loaf a year later. Savings disappeared almost overnight. Retirement funds lost much of their value. Long-term financial planning became nearly impossible. The government desperately searched for solutions. In the early 1990s, Argentina introduced one of its boldest economic experiments. The peso was fixed at a 1-to-1 exchange rate with the US dollar. For every peso in circulation, there had to be a matching dollar in reserves. At first, the results looked remarkable. Inflation collapsed. Confidence returned. Foreign investment increased. Businesses expanded. Consumers regained purchasing power, and Argentina seemed to have found the formula for stability. But underneath the surface, serious problems remained. The fixed exchange rate made Argentine exports more expensive on world markets. Imports became cheaper, making it difficult for domestic manufacturers to compete. Economic growth slowed, unemployment increased, and government debt continued to rise. Because Argentina could no longer print money freely under the currency system, it increasingly relied on borrowing from international lenders. Debt kept growing. Eventually, investors began to doubt whether Argentina could repay its obligations. In 2001, the country entered one of the worst economic crises in modern history. Banks limited withdrawals as frightened citizens rushed to protect their savings. Long lines formed outside financial institutions. Angry protests filled the streets. Violent clashes erupted between demonstrators and police. Within just a few weeks, Argentina went through multiple presidents as political chaos intensified. The government ultimately defaulted on more than $100 billion of debt, the largest sovereign default the world had ever seen at the time. Millions of people fell into poverty. Unemployment surged. Businesses closed. Families lost everything. For many countries, such a disaster would have triggered decades of deep reform. But Argentina's cycle continued. Commodity prices eventually recovered, providing temporary economic relief. Exports increased, government revenues improved, and growth returned for several years. However, many of the structural problems remained unresolved. Government spending continued to expand. Budget deficits persisted. Borrowing increased again. Inflation gradually returned. Over the next 2 decades, Argentina repeatedly negotiated with international lenders, introduced new economic plans, imposed currency controls, and restructured its debt multiple times. Each crisis was followed by a brief recovery, only for new imbalances to emerge. Another major challenge is trust. Many Argentinians no longer trust their own currency. Instead of saving in pesos, many prefer to hold US dollars whenever possible. Some keep cash at home rather than depositing it in banks. Others search for alternative assets that they believe will better preserve their wealth. When citizens lose confidence in their national currency, managing monetary policy becomes far more difficult. Businesses also face constant uncertainty. Imagine trying to plan prices, salaries, or investments when inflation changes every month or even every week. Long-term planning becomes almost impossible, discouraging entrepreneurship and slowing economic growth.
Political divisions have also prevented consistent long-term reforms.
Different governments often pursue completely different economic strategies. One administration increases government spending. The next cuts it dramatically. Regulations change. Taxes change. Currency policies change. For businesses and investors, uncertainty becomes the only constant. In recent years, Argentina has once again attempted sweeping economic reforms aimed at reducing inflation, cutting government spending, and restoring confidence. Supporters argue that painful changes are necessary to break decades of economic dysfunction. Critics warn that these measures can increase unemployment, reduce public services, and create significant hardship in the short term. Whether these reforms succeed remains one of the biggest economic questions in the world today. Argentina's story is not simply about bad luck. It is a story of repeated policy mistakes, political instability, excessive debt, inflation, declining public confidence, and the enormous difficulty of breaking destructive economic cycles once they become deeply rooted. Despite everything, Argentina remains a country with extraordinary potential. It possesses vast natural resources, world-class agricultural production, significant energy reserves, innovative entrepreneurs, and a resilient population that has endured crisis after crisis. The tragedy is not that Argentina lacks opportunity. The tragedy is that it has spent decades struggling to turn that opportunity into lasting stability. Perhaps the greatest lesson Argentina offers the world is this: a nation's wealth is not determined only by its natural resources. Long-term prosperity depends on trust, stable institutions, responsible economic management, and governments capable of thinking beyond the next election. Until those foundations become stronger, Argentina's remarkable potential may continue to be overshadowed by the same question that has echoed for generations. Why does Argentina keep collapsing